Got another turntable service video for you today. This one is a linear tracking turntable put out by Technics. These ones are quite rare, and the configuration I've got here today is even rarer because it has a moving coil cartridge. This is one of the more rare turntables that Technics made. The SL-10. This is a linear tracking turntable. By linear tracking, I mean the tone arm itself is not mounted on a tone arm. It's actually mounted on a servo on a sled, and it moves across this way. And the advantage to a linear tracking turntable is that the needle angle is kept constant. Very similar to the lathe that cuts a record, because the lathe is not on a pivot like a regular tone arm is on a pivot that pivots across the record like that. On an arc, linear tracking goes straight. So it keeps the groove at the same angle that the record was cut. The idea behind it is that if the needle is kept at the same angle that the record was cut, that you're going to get a more accurate reproduction of the record. So many consider the linear tracking turntable to be the holy grail of turntables of the day. And then others, of course, would argue that that's not the case. Either way, whether you're a linear tracking turntable fan or not, the technology was kind of cool. This one here was quite a cool unit because it's a totally automatic system. And to load it up, you just press two little buttons on the side that unlock the lid. The entire lid lifts up. On the turntable there are sensors, so you can see them here. And what these sensors do is these sensors, if you notice right here, there's a series of LEDs below the turntable. And as this rotates, they detect whether there's a record on there and what size the record is. This is for the auto speed selection and of course to drop the needle. So for example, if I want to put a 45 RPM record on, I just have to lift up the built-in 45 RPM adapter and drop the record on. And now you'll notice that the 7-inch sensor is covered. And there's one for 10-inch records and of course one for 12-inch records. So now the turntable knows that there's a record on there. And if there's no record placed on here, and I close it down and I try to start it, what will happen is it's going to make a slight revolution. We'll move it away from where the lights are. Otherwise it'll see them right away. It's going to start to rotate, and as soon as it notices that there's no record in place, it will stop. So if I hit start, it'll start to make a rotation and then it stops. See that? And now it won't, it'll do it again, but it only makes one, not even one full revolution. So it knows that there's no record on here. Put on 45, close it down, press start. It figures out the size first, sets the speed to 45, moves the tone arm over and drops it. To stop it, that sounds like a belt. This unit's probably been sitting for many years without being used, and the belt that controls the worm gear that drives the tone arm back and forth has probably got a flat spot. Every time the belt turns around, you can hear it going thump, 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 thump. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to lock the tone arm in place. There's a little switch here that locks the tone arm up so that it won't try to drop the needle. And then I have to service this because this cartridge, this is a moving coil cartridge that's on here. These turntables, you could fit them with either a moving coil or a moving magnet cartridge by just swapping the cartridge. But this is obsolete. You're never going to find one of these cartridges, and it actually has the preamp built in. There's a switch on the back for a moving magnet or a moving coil. So you'll never find one of these, or you'd be hard pressed to try and find one of these cartridges for a rare unit like this. What's happening on this one is sometimes the needle, when I put the 7-inch, the only thing I can see wrong with this thing, other than the fact that it makes that sound, which is going to be the belt that's probably got a spot it will work its way out, I'm sure, eventually. But the only thing I can see that's really wrong with this thing is it's not dropping. Sometimes it hits the record, sometimes it drops just before the record. Now this bottle detects record size and speed by photo detectors. It has an LED, or a set of LEDs below the platter. There are the photodetectors in the top that correspond to the 3 on the bottom of the platter. Okay, the complaint on this is that the unit sticks while it's playing. So I'm going to have to lubricate the mechanism. To do that on these units, you have to actually take the lower base assembly, the cover, the cowling, I guess, off the base. There's about a half a dozen or so screws in the base here that hold this together. So I'm just going to separate that so that I can access the tone arm, and that way I can access the mechanism to lubricate and clean it. Some of the screws are longer, like these ones in the bottom here are longer. This one's also a longer screw. That's another reason it's always a good idea to video when you're disassembling something, especially something that's got longer and shorter screws, is that if you forget where they go, you can always go back and look at your video to see where the long versus the short screws went. Although on a unit like this, the short screws are very short, so you're not going to mistake them. They won't catch into the where the long screws go, but if someone put a long screw into where a short screw went, it's possible to drive that screw in too far and damage the cabinet. So it's always a good idea to have a record of where you've taken things from. Okay, remove all the screws, and there should be a clip in here as well that has to be cleared. This is removed. I'm going to remove the cartridge just so that nothing happens to it. There's a little screw here on the side of the arm. It holds in this is the P-mount cartridge. So I'm just going to remove this because I don't want any damage happening to the cartridge or the needle. See, it uses the standard P-mount cartridge, but this one's got a moving coil cartridge in it, and they are as rare as hen's teeth. Okay, the cartridge will just unplug. Yeah, that is rare as hen's teeth. So I just want to make darn sure that that cartridge is going to be put away so that it's not going to get damaged in any way. And there is a clip on the hub in the middle there that you have to work to get it to release. I'm just going to unplug this plug here. This plug goes to the switches that control the movement. So here's how it's operated. If you can see this, there's a little belt that drives, and this little belt wears out, so I think I might change one of these if I've got one. It drives this little worm gear. There's an optical sensor down here that spins. Now if you can see it at this angle, let me just turn it around a bit. But there's an optical sensor right down here, and as the motor turns, you can see that that little wheel interrupts a light beam through a photocoupler, which is mounted right here on the circuit board. So as it rotates, it generates a pulse train as it's moving the tone arm. It's using a dowel string that's threaded around this pulley, and onto this rail, and this is the rod that moves the tone arm back and forth. This is a limit switch, so you get two limit switches, one at the beginning of the record. That switch closes when it's at its home position, and that switch closes when the tone arm reaches the end of its travel, and that set switch is adjusted by this set screw here. But those are fine. What I want to do is I gotta clean this rail, and I'm gonna clean this rail as well. And looks like what sometimes happens on this is this black grease that's on the dial string here that operates it. It can drip off and it can get onto here, and then it contaminates it and it gets sticky. So I'm just going to use some isopropyl alcohol, and we'll clean that up, and I'm going to change out that belt, and that should restore this unit to good operation. Something else to keep in mind on these units, if you look at the top right of the screen, you'll see the bearing for the disc clamp. That grease in there has a tendency to dry out. It's typically that black molybdenum grease. It's okay to put in the white lithium grease or the black molybdenum grease. That lubricates the bearing at the top. Now, some collectors like to actually remove that disc clamp because they say that it increases noise and rumble on the record, and that disc clamp can be removed if desired. This is the cam that raises and lowers the tone arm. So there's a little adjustment there for that, and I believe that's also what determines where it drops on the record. So if you're dropping too far to the outside, if you want it to drop in a little more towards the groove, you can adjust this, because the tone arm sits in this groove, and when it drops, this sets the initial starting position for it. And that screw there will adjust it. This is your counterweight adjustment here for the weight of the stylus. So there's markings on there to show where it's set, and you can add or decrease your tone arm or stylus pressure. And this one here, this is just where the wires go inside here. So the rail that gets gummed up on these is this one here, because this one's actually part of the tone arm here that moves back and forth. So it's just this one here that gets gummed up, and once it gets gummed up, it won't move. So to clean this thing properly, we can actually take the rail right out. We can do that by removing the screw back here. Get a bigger screwdriver. And now I can lift this rod out, and every so carefully it'll come out from the other side. It should come out from the other side. And we can remove this rod completely and clean it, and clean the bearing inside here, because this just sits in place here. Right, I could probably just loosen this off just to make it reinserting it a little bit easier, because it is held in place by a clamp. But we want to clean this rod here. As you can see, it's dirty. So we'll clean it with isopropyl, and normally these are lubricated with like a graphite. Right, you don't put oil or anything on this. This is normally, you don't even normally have to lubricate these things, but if you're going to lubricate them with a graphite lubricant. But normally they don't require it. We'll do the same for the slip bearing here. Clean the gunge out of there. sits in like that. This cover. Goes back in like this to hold it in place. Now that turns nice and freely. I'm going to find a belt for it. I should have one. There's nothing special about it, just a small belt. I should have one that will fit that. There's the belt. Okay, I got another belt here. Almost slightly smaller than the original one. I'm fighting against gravity. Okay, that one won't slip. Put the circuit board back in. One thing you need to watch for is the little white switch that sticks out of the bottom of the circuit board. It has to fit into a hole in the back of that cabinet. If you fail to put the base on properly, it's not going to play. So make sure that the little white switch is poking through the hole in the base. Of course, that's the catch that I just popped on for the disc clamp, and now we'll put all the screws back in. A 310 MC. That would sound pretty good on my SL-10, wouldn't it? Can't get these anymore. It's a P-mount. You can get P-mount cartridges, you just can't get the moving coil ones. The nice thing about the P-mount cartridge was a simple installation. You just drop it in and put the screw in. And there's no fiddle farting around with doing any alignment or anything. You put the screw in and you plug it in. Some people don't even put the screw in because they like to experiment with different cartridges, and they'll put the cartridge in and just not even bothered to put the screw in so that they can swap cartridges quickly. Let's test this thing. Not dropping right on the record. We'll just make that adjustment to the arm down here with the adjustment screw. So this determines where the needle sits, how far in it sits. There's a groove here. So we just turn the screw in a little bit. It'll compress that spring a little bit, which will adjust the drop point ever so slightly because we're just catching on the edge of the record. We'll try a full-size LP. One of these god-awful club records. Of course, the problem with this is a 45, so we have to manually select 45 RPM, otherwise it's going to go at 33. We'll try that once again. This unit's not going to be under test for a bit here, and it's all done. The servicing is done on this unit. New belt, lubricate the or clean off the dried grease that was on the slide assembly, and put it all back together. A lot of work to do that on these units. They're kind of a pain in the butt to work on, and whatever you do, God forbid, never take these screws out in the back here. If you take these screws out in the back on one of these units, it's going to fly apart because they're under spring tension. So never remove those screws. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you again in the next one real soon. Bye for now.